you very much for having me here. Can you all hear me all right? Is that coming through? I'm rubbish with microphones, so if you get background sound, just shout at me, and I'll take it off and just shout at you back. Right, let's see. So I'll tell you a little bit about Territory Studios, some of the films that we've worked on, our design thinking process, the conversations that we have with directors, and then I'll try and make it relevant to some of the things that you do here, but I think you'll kind of see where I'm going with this for some of it. So we're a general purpose creative agency, creative production. We work across films, computer games, we work with brands, we work across big experiential productions. Like I say, we've been going for 8 years. We're now about 50 people in London, go up to about 80 when we get really, really busy with contractors. And we've also got offices in San Francisco, LA, and New York. At our core, we're all about story, design, and technology. So normally with our projects, there's a fusion of these different elements that makes it interesting for us and makes it relevant for us. And I'll get into a little bit more of the detail on that. But for us, and especially in the work that we're doing for films, it's about finding the emotional core and the way in which we can use technology and graphics to tell a story in a film. And that is a very geeky process, I won't lie. This specialism is known as FUI, or fictional user interfaces. It's a very particular niche in making a film. So we get paid to do that, which is pretty cool. I just want to talk about other films. So some of these films that I'm about to talk about are a little bit older than me. But it's just interesting to think about how we see that technology used in the film. So when you think about something like HAL, it's got this real sinister undertone. I think people feel disconnected from technology sometimes in films. We're slightly suspicious of it. Definitely when it comes to things like Skynet, this idea that artificial intelligence can just take all of our jobs, take over the world, and just decide to blow us up. So there's real fear sometimes that is pushed through in the storytelling that we use, and it's quite easy to make tech the bad guy in the stories, especially in films. But my memory of tech in the first film was this little geeky kid accidentally hacking into the nuclear control system in war games, and this all kind of kicking off, which is maybe a little bit too close for comfort right now. But for me, there's real nostalgia and warmth and kind of personal connection with some of the technology that goes on in films. So things like the Millennium Falcon, I always really loved because it was that wrestling with technology, that kind of personal connection, that, you know, Han Solo kicking it into shape and making it work. That resonates for us. That human quality and that friction sometimes with technology is actually something we all find quite endearing. And it's those human connections and that emotional touch that I'm really fascinated by, and things that we try and inject into movies when we're helping film directors tell their stories. So to talk you through some of the process, as you'd expect at the very beginning, we come to the projects utterly blank. So we get a film script, and all the different creative teams are running at that problem at the same time. So costume department, the art department, us as graphics, visual effects, we're all reading through the script, understanding the meaning, understanding the characters that are being brought to life, and trying to decipher our part in all of that. And we're all visually and creatively problem solving that at the same time, and we're all helping one another together to get there. And just really understand what is in the director's minds and the vision that's taking place, so that we're all running in the same direction together. One of the great parts about working on a film is you get to work with loads of cool concept artists that know how to design out, look at a script, and then think about the architecture, think about the vehicles, think about the structures in society and how we visually display that. You know, what struggles are going on there? What is the point of the film? What is the director's point? And we can visually display that. And it's amazing. You know, you walk into these art department rooms, probably very similar to this, and it's floor to ceiling covered with incredible visual work like that. And as you become immersed in that creative environment, you all start to visually tune in to one another. You all start to understand where everyone's place is and what we're starting to agree on. Now, unfortunately, the problem with sci-fi is all the computer graphics are blue, apparently. There are blogs dedicated to this where they pause our work and frame grab and then pick out all the problems with it. And I'm sure there's probably quite a number of people that I've met in the past that really enjoy that level of scrutiny. So we have to be very careful to make our work original and to make it bespoke to each project that we come to. No film director wants to repeat the past. They want work that is bespoke to their particular needs and talks specifically to their script. So very early on, one of our first projects as a studio was working with Ridley Scott on Prometheus. And he set out this really wonderful brief that was quite liberating, really. He said, forget about Iron Man, forget about Minority Report when they're waving their hands in front of graphics. I want you to think about the original purpose of the Alien film, looking at Geiger and things like that, where it's organic meets machine. I want to give you the same brief. So imagine you're looking at data, but it's through the lens of tropical fish and coral reefs and that kind of organic life, the bioluminescence, the way that data could move organically and live and breathe. So we took that brief and we really ran with it. And yes, there's a bit of blue in there for everyone that loves sci-fi, but it put us in a different mind space, and it really inspired us to do something that was a bit fresher. So when you see the Orion and you see the characters kind of moving through that holographic spatial world, all the color palettes were all about being inspired by coral reefs. And this is a statement that rings really true for me whenever we're working on films, especially sci-fi or superhero movies, is this idea of, yes, we are projecting into the future, but so much of it is grounded in the now. If we think about our views and how we're projecting ahead, it says so much about the current state of things as we're experiencing the world. So I think we're always trying to ground it in some way in our experience of the now, so that the future projection just feels relevant and believable to everyone. And one of the ways that we do that is research. So graphics is a fairly new thing in films, you know, still relatively to some of the other crafts in movies. One of the big ones is costume design, and they just have this wonderful process of building up a visual language and working with film directors and understanding the scripts. And a big part of what they do is research, just fully immersing themselves and understanding the worlds in which they're about to build. So they will understand the weave of the fabric and the historical context and the weight of the fabric and how that might change the performance of an actress or an actor in a particular way that says something about their character and their status in the world. So there's a lot of deep diving on this research and truly understanding all the material. And just by virtue of immersing yourself in all that material, you just breathe out great work. It just happens. It feels relevant. It has depth of meaning. So when we got to work on The Martian, this gentleman floating in the background, that's Dave Lavery. He heads up Jet Propulsion Labs at NASA. And we were having, the only brief from Ridley Scott on The Martian was just go away and speak to NASA. So he was just spending week in, week out with us, helping us understand the data, the roles in which all the different engineers at NASA function and how they work with that data. It was a big part of our task, was really to create the NASA Mission Control Center and the various other different displays in the HAB and the other vehicles throughout the film. Now, the problem with NASA is their screens look rubbish, which doesn't really mix well with the Ridley Scott film. It still has to look beautiful. So we were playing really a balancing act between being very authentic to the data, so taking all the NASA data that we could and playing that back authentically, but still creating a design layer that meant that it could shoot well. Because those bright white screens, when you're paying a lot of money for actors, become distracting. So you don't want those. So we're just very mindful of that. So we're playing back the content as true as we can and research as well as we can, and normally just ripping straight from a NASA email, and then creating that design layer so that we can still tell a story. And part of telling a story with graphics sometimes in screens is that it reads in 3 seconds. You know, it's that shot, it's gone, but you got it. It said something to you. It's being very efficient with the information and the storytelling that you have, those moments that you have. And the great thing is, when you're working with NASA, they have all of this Hubble imagery. So you have a great access to images that just immediately place the audience. And so this is the set we built. So this is out in Hungary. All of those screens are live. They're all running interactions. We created all of that bullpen. It's about 200 screens running from a server. And then there's 3 big LED screens. And it's just part of the storytelling. And for us, we were helping Ridley to understand where the camera should go and telling certain story moments. Of course, they don't shoot these films chronologically. We might be filming the end of the film first and then going back to the beginning, then jump into a different scene. So just staying on track with knowing what was being shown when became really quite complicated. And we had to really sell the kind of the cleverness of what NASA does, which is not a lot of software interpretation of the data. Actually, it's a lot of PhDs looking at data coming through on displays and doing their own calculations, still in calculus on pen and paper. So we couldn't undersell that. So it's not this. A lot of what we do is not this. That is often the perception, and we do a lot of work in post. And one of the films I'm going to talk about later was all in post because we couldn't make it for real. But whenever we can, we try and turn up to a film set, and it looks like this. So this was shot with my iPhone. It's on a film called American Assassin, and it just helps the actors immerse themselves. They can walk around the set, they can see the content in front of them, they can deliver their lines, point to the right things, touch the keyboards, interact with it. It just helps with their level of immersion. The person that's filming it, obviously they prefer it because they're not having to imagine what the lighting's going to be like. There's not lots of green everywhere. They're dealing with an actual environment that they're shooting. And the director often loves it because they can find different shots. They can work with the actors, they can pace around the environment and find little moments that might become more interesting to them. So whenever possible, we try and build it out as a live experience on set. And that really kind of leads me into Blade Runner. And that, you know, with Blade Runner, it was an interesting project because the original was amazing. And with that comes with it a shed load of pressure that we put on ourselves mostly. And working with an incredible team, which I'll get into in a second. But we were kind of threading this needle of keeping on board all the original fans, but making it relevant to a modern audience. And that was really the challenge. So our client, Denis Villeneuve, we were having quite regular meetings with him. So his role is really to make sure that we understand the story, understand the world building. Our work is always driving towards telling that story. Dennis, he's the production designer, so he's really the architect of the film. He's designing the buildings, he's designing the cityscapes, the architecture, he's coming up with the overall look, and is really our immediate, along with Paul Inglis, the supervising art director, our immediate report in. And then Roger Deakins, who got the Oscar for his work on the film, and well-deserved, he basically is a benchmark for us. If he shoots anything that we put in front of him, we know it was good. Otherwise, it's just not getting in there because he doesn't shoot any rubbish. So it was, you know, obviously as a client list, that's quite terrifying. But but it was amazing to work with them. So in terms of the brief, there were 3 words that we had to have center of mind the whole way we were working through the film. And this was really for all creative departments. This was so that, as I was saying earlier, we're all pushing in the same direction. We're all starting to tune in to the same idea of what this future LA could be. So scale is a massive one, pardon the pun. Just this notion of contrast in scale was really important because it creates a sense of isolation. So if you feel minute in the environment, that says quite a lot, and it says a lot about where we've ended up as a human race. Power was a really important one. So the power struggle more than anything. I really hope you've all seen the film. No, I'm sorry, I'm going to spoil bits of it for you. So there's a real power struggle between replicants and humans, which was really key. But there was this real kind of exercising of power, corporate power, in terms of just an elitism going on. So that was really important to come through. And then the absolute essential one was brutality. Brutality needed to just feed through everything. This film needed to feel like an intense experience. The director really wanted to wake the audience up. Whether you like the film or not, it had to have an impact on you. He wanted to, have that sensorial overload almost. So brutality, whether it was how different levels of society were treating one another, or just everyone just wearing it on their face. Like it's an intense experience. There's no getting away from it. How the hell have we got here? Surely technology is moving us towards a utopian dream, not a dystopian one. So it was that type of question the director was asking the whole time of us. So we just had the privilege of just working with incredible concept art. And as soon as we started to see this concept art, we could all start to understand where we were all tracking towards. And we're really lucky to just be working so closely with the art department that we're getting all of these really cool visuals, and helping us understand the environment is so key, because we don't want to build our graphics in isolation. It shouldn't feel like someone had gone off and designed this thing and another team had gone off and designed the architecture, and then when you all turn up on set, it's like, oh, well, that doesn't really fit together. We're always being mindful of everyone else's creative influences and designing within. So one of the key points, one of the pebbles that Denis as a director dropped into the kind of history line for Blade Runner was between the original film and the film we were about to make, there'd been a technological event. So the idea that hard drives and electronic displays and phones and batteries had all been completely wiped. So anyone that had access to electronic systems now were in the elite section. It was a commentary on their status. Everyone else, replicants and most humans, were cobbling together some sort of analog tech. So it was optical, it was imperfect, it was mechanical in movement, it was a hack together. And we started looking at the idea of microfiche, if you remember old libraries, and kind of magnifying into like acetate sheets, real kind of human, imperfect graphic design with history to it. And we also researched bioluminescence, which was quite interesting. So using an algae that responds to an input to kind of create displays. So that became a little bit more of an organic reference for us as well. So the director loved all of these kind of mood boards that we started putting together. We started having a conversation about how we could design something that felt relevant to the old movies, but also projected forward enough time that Harrison Ford's aging would be okay. And we started developing things like this. So this is the screen where Ryan kind of zooms in and looks at DNA and compares it. And we really liked the idea that it was all graphics etched onto glass plates. There was a whole library, almost a Rolodex of glass data, and they would mechanically slot in, and you'd have this real sense of where the lighting was coming from. So it had to have that kind of a slight handmade analog digital hybrid thing going on. And we got things wrong. We did so much design work that in the beginning the director wasn't responding to. It was too CGI, it was too luminescent. And we really started questioning, well, are we working on the right tools? We're thinking about how the original movie would have been made, there wouldn't have been access to Macs, there wouldn't have been access to Photoshop and Illustrator and all those kind of tools that we're so used to designing interfaces for. How would they have done it? And we took a bit of an art school approach to it all and just said, let's, for a couple of months, just step away from the computer and see what we can create in a more kind of analog way. So we knew we had this screen coming up that was going to be a brain scan, looking at brain tissue kind of close up and reading that in some way, like a Harding test almost. And so we started cutting into fruit, doing macro photography, and then projecting that onto walls and designing graphics and projecting over the top of that and then rephotographing it. And then we started bringing digital tools back in and having this real back and forth between analog and digital. And as we started to play with this, the director was really responding to the process and less really concerned about the end results. And we started getting things like this. So this ended up in the film, and whilst it's a brain scan, because we've told you it's a brain scan, Ryan's famous and he's told you it's a brain scan, that is a watermelon. So I love that, and that's what films are about. It's about smoke and mirrors and kind of selling in that history. And actually it's the design process that the whole creative team were buying into. They weren't really as worried about the end result. So this was a key moment for me. So in the original film, I just remember Harrison Ford's character speaking to a computer and kind of zooming into a photograph and then discovering a reflection in the mirror. And that really said something about him as a detective, his character as a detective. So it came up again in the film. There was this moment where, and I'm sorry, there's a spoiler for people that haven't seen it now. There's a barcode on a pelvis and it's quite a big deal. And we had the moment of that. We kind of needed to reveal that moment and show the discovery of the barcode on the pelvis bone. And again, we went the wrong way. We tried lots of different photographing techniques, and it was becoming too luminous again and too bright and too poppy for the film. It needed to feel cold. We tried some other things, and it was too CGI and had lens flares in it. And the director was just reminding us of the creative process that was working for us. So in the end, we went and found a pelvis bone, and we 3D scanned it, and then we projected it again and photographed it, and we were just very, very subtle. Just let the content do all the talking and be really paired back with the design. We weren't overly designing. We were kind of putting our egos on the back burner and just letting the story come through the material. And that's where we started to hit results like that. And that's when the director was really back on track with us. And this is just me being a fanboy now. Got to work on the spinner. That's me name dropping. Got to work on the flying car. That's just cool. And the way in which we did that was they were kind enough to give us the interior designs of the car. So all of the interfaces were designing into that kind of physical stuff. It all needed to feel relevant. And we can't, it's so tempting as designers to just focus in on the singular design, the singular layout, and not think about the wider context. But for us, so much of the work is seen in a wide shot that you have to consider the entire set. You have to consider the entire character's view of the world that they're placed in. So we're always designing across a set. And yes, each design needs to hold up on its own. It needs to have its own design language. It needs to have iconography that's bespoke. We're not really designing a car. It was, much to Peugeot's dismay, who was doing product placement, it was a lever rather than a steering wheel. So no big badge for Peugeot, unfortunately. And so we were talking more to that kind of design language. It was more about avionics. And there was this notion that the car's really, when you're looking at your windscreen and there's all this smog, you can't see very far ahead. So there was a three-dimensional sensor that would pick up on like a point cloud type idea, like a radar, three-dimensional radar. So there's all this kind of other thinking going into how do they survive in this environment? How does it become practical? What would the technology need to enable, considering how much they've screwed up the planet? And then in stark contrast to that, and as a kind of identifier for Wallace's status in society, he was one of the few people in his limo and a few other displays around his buildings where it was stark, it was minimal, it was very digital. It was the idea that this technology had been designed purely for him. Only he had access to it, only he understood it. It was a design that needed to speak to that kind of elite status.
I want to ask you some questions.
Checking in on phone serial number.
That's gonna
So it's currently at the Design Museum. We've got a small exhibition piece where you can see the graphics live in the environment. It's part of the Beazley Design Awards. So if you want to go and see how it physically is, there's a series of CRTs downstairs in the basement, I think it is, and you can see some of that work. So it's worth a look if you get a chance. So we don't just work on stories and make-believe, some of our clients call it. We also work in the real world, and I thought I'd just share with you a showreel that's been developing the last 2 or 3 years, where we're taking the skill set of delivering graphics live on a film set, and what we realized is that we can take that and apply it to brand experiences and other events and performances, and mixing digital and art with live performance. So we've got a showreel here for that. So it brings me nicely into a really beautiful project that we had the chance to work on. So it was a partnership with an agency called Beyond Words, who are really good at bringing stories to data, ourselves and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So the Gates Foundation is all about eradicating tropical diseases. So a really worthwhile cause. Bill was going to go walk up on stage in Geneva, present to some quite wealthy people, thank them for their donations, explain to them what the work they'd been doing had achieved. So some really big stories around data, and then maybe suggesting that they should pump up some more money and they could do some more great things for tropical diseases. So we had an amazing large canvas that was running behind Bill as he was presenting to this audience. So it had to bloody work because it was only one night and it was Bill Gates. And he really cared, well, the whole Gates Foundation really cared about the accuracy of the data. And we are talking about millions and millions and millions of vaccinations and the effects on lives. So it was important to us to get the data right, but it was also, and representing that data, but it was also really important just to make it engaging and powerful and clear. So we used some tools and techniques that we'd normally use for visual effects, but just use them in a completely different setting. And then coordinated that with Gates's performance on stage, so it kind of reacted and timed in with all the different moments that he was speaking. So one dystopian project, hopefully one utopian project, and we're just really helping people future cast and imagine what could be, or hopefully what will not be. Which brings me nicely to Ready Player One. Please tell me you've all seen this. Right, good. We're in a good place. And I hope you bloody liked it, because I'm going to talk about it for quite a while now. So Ernie Klein, obviously, if you haven't read the book, the film is pretty true to the book, but Stephen always wanted to write himself out of it, or take some of his film references. The films that he'd directed, he wanted to pull out of it because he thought that was a bit weird, for whatever reason. So that's the book. And it's really referencing 1980s nostalgia, loads of incredible IPs. I mean, the lawyer team on this was insane, because they had to get so many people to agree that you could have a Star Wars property next to a Warner Brothers property. We fortunately didn't get caught up in that too much. And our part was heads-up displays, it was branding, it was logos, it was anything that was designed, so faked commercials. So there's a moment in when you're first kind of walking around the caravans and you see commercials for the haptic suit. We created those. I'll go through it all. So classic Goonies story. If you're a fan of the Goonies, you know, it's the kids going up against the big evil corporation type thing. Classic Spielberg. You know, we feel good about this. And I think the reason that Territory was approached was because of our experience in designing a lot of interfaces for computer games. We've worked on Forza and Call of Duty and Medal of Honor and lots of great titles. And again, we've tried to bring a bit of personality and humanity to all of that. It's always interesting to us when we can design in the ability for people to modify it and be a little bit more expressive with the interface and the digital systems. And it's becoming more and more interesting, and it was especially interesting to the director that people want to personalize their digital version of themselves out to the world. And that's not just your avatar, that's anything that they can portray outwards. I think we're all fascinated by this, whether it be through social media or VR or AR or however it's expressed. We don't accept the standard default setup. There's personal expression that's going on in there, and people want that to be enabled for them. So each character had their own brand. So first of all, we started off creating personalized logos for each character. So we had to really kind of talk quite deep with Stephen about what the 1980s meant to him, all the edge glows, all the shiny logos, the colorways. And then we started realizing, okay, so if we're building these user interfaces and they're going over the storytelling moments, there's going to be times when it needs to be really dense with information. There's going to be times where we need to let it pare back and just let the story come through. The action's going to be changing all the time. Bloody hell, you keep moving the camera about everywhere. Like, where do we put this information? How does it sit? So it had to be a really dynamic system. So we couldn't deal with it as a kind of design lookup. We had to play around with it in animation and prototype it all the time, because there's all this beautiful work underneath, and I don't want to get in the way of that. So we were really playing with our design egos, like, well, we want our work to be seen, but we can't get in the way of the main storytelling. You know, story is king here. So there's a lot of back and forth. understanding the characters, exploring all the different logos, making sure that the design systems all felt consistent for the film, but still felt like an expression for each character. So loads of different design layouts. And the other trick was that it wasn't just being seen in the Oasis, in the virtual world. There was also moments where it was being seen in the real world. We were wanting to use that design language to tie the two together. So you knew that, okay, Parsifal's logo is reverse and it's that colorway, but subconsciously you'd remember that back when you're in the virtual world and you're seeing it. And we had to design for white trash, which is not a brief I've had before, but I think you'll agree that classifies him as white trash. And lots of different story moments. And again, it's a bit like visual effects. If it wasn't there, it wouldn't feel right, and you wouldn't necessarily know why. But because it has been tidied up and because it has been thought about it, and there is that kind of layer of extra meaning in there, going back to the research, it all builds to something. It all supports. Now, this is an early test that we were one of 3 big companies. There was Territory Studios sitting between Digital Domain, who are known for working with James Cameron on all of his films, the Terminator films. They were dealing with the visual effects in the real world, so creating all of those stacked caravans. Then Industrial Light and Magic, we were working with them really closely as well. They were creating all the CGI characters and the overall virtual worlds. And then our design work was really sitting between the two. So we would get these animation tests from Industrial Light and Magic, and the camera would be moving around all over the place, and the action would be happening, and we would have to design to that. So our design system had to work for each shot, and the shots would be developing and the character actions would be developing, and we would have to respond to that. So it wasn't very easy. And then you see these amazing renders coming through from Industrial Light and Magic, feeling completely and utterly destroyed, really. And just constantly refining, constantly tweaking, constantly designing over the top. That particular shot took about 200 versions. The Territory Studio going back and forth, and Steven Spielberg probably saw about 50 different versions. So we'd be working out problems with Industrial Light and Magic, and then putting it in front of the director and kind of hoping it was all okay. And generally, the comments coming through were always about story. Like, will the audience understand this? Does this still track back to what was being said in the book? How is this saying something about the characters? And it's very nuanced. You know, you'd have to pause it and really have a look through it to kind of get it. But all of that depth of meaning builds up to mean something. And so one of the last films that Spielberg worked on where there was kind of interfacey type stuff was Minority Report, and he was aware that that became quite a big element in the film. So he really wanted to think about how this representation of VR might influence what we do with it in the future. So he loved the idea that interfaces were less about clicking on buttons and more about gestures. So if I'm interested in something, I move it around, maybe it's object-based, I grab it and I share it with someone. It was all about the physical performance, because we couldn't care less about someone typing on a keyboard. That's really boring filmmaking. So the more that we can bring physical performance in, the more we're going to be engaged as an audience. So we had to design for the bad guys too, Evil Corporation. So it had to feel a lot more angular, pixel-based, very corporate. And we had to consider how it would look in third person. And this became the main identifier, and then turned into a series of a huge icon library, actually, because they ended up in the story points going through lots of data as they're taken over the world. So we built IOI out into a motion brand in the end, and then that became part of the targeting system. So that's one of my favorite moments before Mechagodzilla builds out. Pretty cool. The biggest element for us in the film was the VR heads-up boot up. So when you first go into the Oasis, there's this shot of our hero character lifting up the VR goggles to the face. The camera comes around, goes past his eye, and then goes down into the VR headset. So it was a digital domain coming around here, then Territory Studio taking over, flying through this boot up sequence. And the idea was just immersion. I want to feel like I'm being pulled into this world. And then we hand over to Industrial Light and Magic, who then do the fly through this incredible virtual world where you see Batman climbing a cliff and spaceships and all this madness. So it was a real special moment for us. And Stephen saw it as this branding for the film. It was a branding for the Oasis. It's what he believed in terms of true immersion. And he referenced this old YouTube clip, which I think is from Space Odyssey 2001, which is a great reference. And it just has this sense of rush and light. But we had to refine this so hard. So the reason that's a CGI head is because you can't get a camera past someone's head like that. So that's digital domain. And then we're just building up the layers, thinking about all the cultural references, thinking about all the different 1980s logos you might have seen in computer games, all the different effects, version after version after version, testing it in animation, refining it by the frame so that the logo broke up at just the right moments. You got enough read time, but then you were very quickly into the action. It shouldn't feel too labored. So everything was scrutinized. So we're up to version 100 there. And it just kept going and going and going and going. But what it did was because we were working on such a key asset for the film, it set this quality bar for us across all the work. So we almost use this as a design DNA for everything else.
I created three hidden in the dark rooms at the center of a maze that's located somewhere. Let the hunt for Halloween Easter egg begin. Those with the skills to survive will reach the end where the prize awaits.
But life is not forever. I'm putting down the tail again. If you ever want to get your best, writing out the day's events. No regrets.
There's nothing left in the war.
Are you willing to fight? What you say about his companies? What you say about society? That's the risk. That's the myth. That's the mystery. That's the risk.
So that's it, really. Story, technology, and design. Thank you very much.